going to get started. If you all want to have a seat, we're going to go through a formal presentation first, and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. We're going to try, I think, and do this up here without the microphone. If you can't hear, please let us know, and we'll bring the microphone back. We will use the microphone though for the question and answer portion. Well, one of our... Sorry. You get to come up here. Yeah. Just stay here so I can answer.
Sure.
That's okay. We're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. It is very, very nice to see all of you here. My name is Kelly Bourgeois. I'm the city manager. And then I have with me Aaron Sherpick, our community development director, and Kevin Hansen, our public works director and city engineer. We have 4 of our 5 council members here. Mayor Donna Schmidt is here, Councilmember Nick Novitsky, Councilmember Connie Biskins, and Councilmember John Murzyn over there. As I mentioned, we will go through, we have a formal presentation that we'll do first, and then we'll have time at the end if you have any questions. I'm assuming many of you do, and if we don't answer them while we're giving the presentation, we'll have time at the end to try and answer any of those. I will give one caveat up front. This is all living, dynamic, moving. Anything that you see here, it could change tomorrow. But we wanted to get you the information that we have at this point. We are asking our city council and our EDA to move fairly quickly on making some decisions on the Central Avenue and 40th concept, just given some other developer timelines. So that's why we thought we'll get this information out to you, but just please know that the numbers are extremely preliminary. The way the floor plans are laid out, those will change. I guarantee you. The footprint themselves will likely be very similar, but how they're laid out internally will change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Hansen first to give kind of a history of how we got to where we're at today, and then we'll move forward from there.
Thank you, Kelly. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I don't like using a mic, and I tend to cut or walk around a little bit. So if you don't hear me, or if you need me to repeat something, just stop me and ask me. And I'll be more than happy to do that. So what I was going to just bring up is give you some background for City Hall and how we got here, and then talk a little bit in detail about the process we've been going to at least into 2019. And then Aaron's going to take over with another site that came up in 2019. So City Hall itself is over 60 years old. And we have some conflicting information when it was actually built. It was an older building. We have plans from 1958. And then the building was added to substantially in 1979. And it was added to again in 1989. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we feel that's a little bit of a problem for how that work was done. So recently, Public Works took over facilities maintenance in 2013. And what is that? So we take care of all of the municipal or city buildings, but along with that, we take care of the complaints. We take care of the issues, and then we develop capital improvement plans for all of our city buildings. So that falls under the facilities maintenance. So when we did that in 2013, one of the first things that we were brought into the picture on were some of the complaints that were being talked about at City Hall. And I think one of the primary ones was really some of the water intrusion, and some of the overall issues there. So I'm going to talk about the water problem first. So we were brought in 2013, 2014, when it was described to us that there's water coming into the building. Our first feedback on that was, well, we've got roof problems. Water is actually coming into City Hall through the block, through the windows, and through the mortar of City Hall, particularly in the old section of the building. And that's the part of the building that is currently housed by finance and by community development. And that is the east side of the building. So one of the things we did to further address that, how bad is the problem, we went through and did a report that was conducted by Braun Intertech, and we used infrared thermography and looked at the entire exterior envelope. What that does is it just tells us where we have leakage, where we have water intrusion throughout the building. So that report was completed, and basically the recommendation of that was that you have significant intrusion into that building from both water and from air. And the reason for that is that there is no insulation, there is no water vapor, and there's no other type of vapor barrier within that building for how it was constructed. So what happens is when you have temperature differences in that building, it has the ability to draw moisture in through the concrete block. We have exactly that same problem down at Public Works for the same principle, and that's an all concrete block building, and we have water intrusion coming in through the block and through the mortar at that building also. So it's not that it's uncommon, but it is happening here at City Hall. So following that, we took a look at what are some of the other issues with the building. So from staff's perspective, we just looked at major componentry of the building. We looked at the roof, we looked at the mechanical systems of the building, and prepared a summary report to the City Council in 2015, and basically told the Council, and just went through it, that we have some major investment into this building just to keep the building in operational condition. So it wasn't only the exterior walls, the intrusion, the exterior block and windows, there were other things related to the HVAC system, the new roof that needed to get replaced. It was just because it was their time, they were aging out. Following that, I should say one of the things that also occurred during this time frame is that the use of the building changed. So in 2009, police and fire moved out of this space and moved into their own building. So we have about a 34,000 square foot building where about only half of it is being used by City Hall services. So we have that amount of space that we're continuing to keep and maintain that really isn't being used currently. So that's one of the things that is a consideration down the road. So in 2017, the City Council identified at a goal-setting retreat for a short-term goal to go ahead and prepare a City Hall master plan. And really what we wanted to focus on within that master plan was space needs. So within the operation of the City Hall, what kind of space do we need to have for that operation now and also into the future? What would it take to remodel the existing site and bring that building up to certain code level and get some detail on that? And then also to look at, if we were to build a new building, what are some sites that we could look at for a new City Hall? So one of the first things we did is we looked at the space needs and went through a review with our city staff and developed what we felt was an appropriate amount of space for City Hall operations. And that report developed about 17,500 square feet for our current use, and also we're not really growing, so we had some small projections in departments for the potential of addition, but really wasn't much additional from how we're currently operating. One of the things subsequent to that, so that as we start talking here, you see why that is. Recently, we've also looked at bringing public works engineering into City Hall from a customer service perspective and quite frankly just how we operate. A lot of our work is done with City Hall folk, with administration, with HR, with community development, and really from the customer service perspective, so they're not at another building. And that's not a new idea. So then, the City Council hired the firm of Leo A. Daly, they're the same company that did the preliminary work on our city library, to prepare a master plan. That was done in 2017, and they got started on that in 2018. So the space needs was completed. The next thing that they looked at was the facility condition analysis. That is available on our website, the complete report. And that really detailed out, not immediately, but over time, that existing City Hall site needed about $6.6 million of improvement of work just to bring it up to current code and to really update the mechanical systems and componentry of the building. But one of the things that it did not do was did not address the exterior walls. It could not fix that. Did not address accessibility. When I talked earlier that the building itself has been added on to over time, we have multiple different levels in that building. Right now we're operating on about 4 different levels, but each one of those additions, it created not necessarily new steps, but new elevations within the building. And that leads to accessibility issues within that building. Does not address that. And then quite frankly, just the functionality. One of the things that the building has is that all the offices are kind of spaced out, but also spaced out on different floors. From an efficiency perspective, it doesn't really work well. So I think within the direction that was given to Leo A. Daly, we wanted to look at a building that was on a single level, both from an efficiency perspective, but also from a customer service perspective. So a master plan was being worked on. The first review the city council had was in 2018, and that was really a draft to look at some additional sites. There were 4 sites that were looked at. Existing site was one. We looked at the public safety building. We looked at the public safety building north, that empty lot to the north, and then we looked at the empty lot behind or to the east of the library. At that meeting, the city council asked to have a 5th option to be added to that, and that is the city hall site but connected to Murzyn. That again is not a new concept. I think there was a referendum that looked at expanding the hall operations here back in the 90s, and it looked at expanding both space but also gym space and some field house space there. So that's not, that type of connection, that type of addition is not a new concept out there. So based on that feedback, a 5th option was created, and that makes that connection onto this building, onto Murzyn Hall, and that was completed at the end of 2018. The master plan was accepted by the city council, but a site was not selected. Within the report, we identified a preferred site, but the council did not elect a final site for a new city hall. Then in 2019, we had another, and I use this word, it's kind of got dual meaning, development, because it's a development, but it's kind of a new event came on. And Aaron's going to talk about that. But really, as an outcome of that, the council asked us to get into more detail on the 2 sites. Aaron will talk about the other site, and then also get more detail on what is called the preferred option. So that preferred option, what we wanted to do is really, how would it fit on the land and how would the building itself work? And that's really, it's called a fit plan. So we take the spaces that have been described, basically the departments, and fit them inside of a particular building and just see how it'll fit on the site and then how it'll operate overall. So within that, that's what you see on these 2 drawings. So first of all, what we're looking at here is, this is called option 5. And it shows a 22,500 square foot building, and it shows it that it's right on Mill Street. And I'll go through some pros and cons of that. We have shared parking, shared with the Murzyn Hall operation, and then also shared with City Hall operations. And really what we're viewing that as is the primary uses of these 2 don't correspond at the same time. Largely a lot of Murzyn Hall activities occur when City Hall is not open and vice versa. Then we looked at doing some things as a potential along 40th Avenue. 40th Avenue is the primary corridor. It's a county roadway, it's a county state aid highway, and that is being looked at for complete reconstruction here, probably in about the next 3 to 5, 3 to 7 years. That was one of the things we wanted to take a look at, just in terms of having something that would complement that type of improvement. The building layout itself, as I mentioned, there is a connection into Murzyn Hall, and that creates somewhat of a campus feel, having these 2 buildings together connected. We listed the closure of Mill Street as both a con and a pro. From the pro perspective, it closes a skewed intersection. This is something we've had conversations with the county about, just in terms of this access and having it on a county state aid highway. So that'll be continued conversations whether this happens or not. From a pro perspective, recognizing that closure of Mill Street and having access through here, we did provide another access that lines up with an adjacent street through this site and having a wider drive aisle so that you can still get out to 40th, and that, quite frankly, the citizens here can still get in, park here off of 40th Street. So we're maintaining that, but we're just lining it up from an adjacent street and getting rid of the skewed intersection. One of the things that this does is it does allow, if the city felt the need down the road, whatever that is, for some future expansion, it does have additional land. And the other thing that this does is it brings recreation into this building and allows for updating and remodeling of Murzyn Hall. Last time there was major updating of this facility was in 1989. And I think for how popular this building is, that it certainly could be something that could be considered as an update to this building. Both in terms of space, but also the amenities that are here. And that would be some other future development. I think the cons, and these are on these sheets, which are also, I think, up here and back here. Pardon me?
Over there.
On the table.
Yep.
So there's a summary sheet. So these And these, we didn't get into a lot of detail other than recognizing them, but I think they can be, considered a con for any type of development. We do have utilities in Mill Street, those do need to get relocated. Stormwater, we can accommodate a good portion of it within the parking lot, but in order to accommodate the building and some other area would be have to work with intrusive parking. And probably one of the biggest things, I talked about the closure of Mill Street as a con, but also is, quite frankly, just the cost of a standalone building like this. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron to talk about the other site that's being looked at, but also then about the budgetary numbers for both of these.
I can make my way through this. Not the most visible for everyone, so I apologize, but we'll do our best. So, Aaron Sherpick, Community Development Director with the city, and taking it from where Kevin left off, I wanted to kind of explain the evolution of the other project site and how we came to even have this conversation that we're having this evening to try and determine where we might go and how this entered the picture. So just for quick reference, the site that we're talking about is at the intersection of Central and 40th. It's currently occupied by the Northeast Bank building and the municipal parking ramp. They're also included in this project site is a single-family lot that the city had owned for years that is now a stormwater improvement area. So that's where we are in the world. That site has been a priority redevelopment site for the city for several years, for many reasons, but most recently because it sat vacant for the better part of 6 years and nothing has happened. So we've wanted to do something there for many years. There's been a lot of different ideas and different iterations of what might go there. But more recently, the city took an obviously more proactive role in securing the future for this site by acquiring the Northeast Bank building earlier this summer. So we do now own that site as well as the adjacent municipal parking ramp. And together, that's the total project area that we're discussing. Recently, the city went through an update of our comprehensive plan, and it has guided this site that we're talking about for transit-oriented development, given its proximity to the central bus hub and a busy commercial corridor. So transit-oriented development standards include an emphasis on a mix of retail, office, and higher density residential uses, and also prioritize pedestrian scale improvements with any sort of development that we do in that district. So with that in mind, and some of those guiding principles, the city did engage the development community about a year ago in the summer of 2018 for a developer roundtable to talk about this site, to seek feedback and gauge interest in it. From those discussions, there was a developer that kind of stood above the rest, I guess would be the best way to describe it, and that's a Lattice, and that's who we're working on for the plans for the site. No matter where we decide to locate City Hall, they are under contract with a preliminary development agreement for the property. So they rose to the top of the list because their proposal included vertical mixed-use concept with luxury apartments, ground floor commercial, and the pedestrian amenities that we were looking for. So hitting all of the priorities that have just been set forth in the comprehensive plan and for this area was really important to the city. It's always nice when a developer sits down with you and asks, what would you like? And takes that feedback into consideration and then, proposes a project that's in alignment with that. So that's how we attached ourselves to that development team in comparison to some of the other proposals that were just housing predominantly, so just apartments, and some of the other proposals did include a reuse of the existing building and retaining the municipal ramp. So Lattice kind of brought the full package together. So as Lattice developed their plans more fully, they did become aware of the city's desire to have a new city hall built, and they pitched staff with the idea of locating City Hall at this development site, included in the first floor programming, so on the main floor. To be honest, the city greeted that initial idea with skepticism, but didn't rule the option out, and directed Lattice to essentially make a compelling case. So why should we do that? To do that, they were given a couple of guideposts, first being cost effectiveness, so make it compelling around cost, and then also on function. So as they went to refine their pro forma and look at those criteria and decide how we might put something together that works there, the idea became more and more interesting to staff. As the function and proposed layout are efficient in our estimation, and co-locating at this site does reduce our capital and operational costs significantly. So that's what brought us here today, why we've inserted this potential option as part of the calculus for this new City Hall conversation. And with that, I'd kind of like to give you a sense of the general layout of the site because it is unique, review the pros and cons, talk a little bit about budget, and then also discuss some of the feedback that we've received already and some of the questions we've been getting around this site. So it might be hard to see from where you are, but Central Avenue and 40th on the top, so north is up. The City Hall would be at that corner of 40th and Central under this scenario. On the corner of Gould and Central would be a retail space, programmed as a cafe right now, likely a coffee shop or a small restaurant. And then behind these amenities on Central, the square footage of this is almost 21,000 square feet of City Hall space. Behind Central is parking, so underneath this red predominantly is surface parking for staff of City Hall and residents visiting City Hall for city use, as well as additional spaces for the cafe and some for apartments. There's a ramp you can't see in the corner, but underneath the main floor would be proposed to have the underground parking for the residents. That's their primary parking area. So underground parking, surface parking that's hidden or covered, and then 5 floors of housing above this, so of apartments. So they're luxury apartments, a product that we don't have in the city, ranging, the unit count is 250 to 270 at the moment. High amenities, top of the class apartment facility on top of City Hall and retail. So that's it in a nutshell from a site perspective. There's some renderings over here kind of showing what the view from Central Avenue would look like. They're not very embellished, it's just very plain at the moment, but City Hall at the corner here with its own entrance, and then the cafe space. And then this is a blow up of those 2 entrances off Central, and a pocket park, so in between City Hall and the cafe is an indent in the building where it would be a gathering space for the public to use as a little pocket park. So hitting all of the design elements that were important to us and putting it into a vertical mixed use package. So when it comes to the pros and cons, we've laid out a few that, of a rolling list that we're kind of developing. First with the positive. So the first, I think, and foremost compelling reason why we're even discussing this, kind of cutting edge idea is that it significantly lowers construction costs for the city. And we'll go through that in greater detail. Lowers operational expenses. It locates City Hall in a prominent and accessible location. It's down the street from our library, across the street from the county services, so we're co-locating other public facilities and can streamline some of our services. It drives pedestrian traffic to Central Avenue, lowers costs to obtain a new City Hall, which thereby frees up resources that we've saved for other projects and other priorities. And creates a stable anchor presence on 40th and Central. And then it does free up the current site of City Hall for future redevelopment and tax-based expansion as well. I think when we discuss the cons, the predominant con that jumps out at most people is the fact that we're now sharing space and amenities with another user. So apartment and a cafe, it means that we have less site control. We're making joint decisions on anything building related, and there would be some key differences in that. Cross-access agreements, ongoing negotiations for any changes to the building, etc. So that really has driven the conversation about how would we live and cohabitate. We think that they're manageable issues, but it's obviously significantly different. Uses potential commercial space. So potential commercial space on the first floor. So if the city hall doesn't go at this location, it opens up additional retail space on the first floor that could be utilized. And we'll discuss it a little bit later in the presentation, but it wouldn't be a one-for-one. So we've got 21,000 square feet of city hall. It wouldn't be replaced with 21,000 square feet of commercial. It would likely be half of that, you know, with storefronts just towards the front. But it could offer more space for that. It certainly could be considered an untraditional location for a city hall. There's only a few examples that we've been able to find across the country, quite frankly. There are public-private facilities in all over, but at this scale, it's pretty rare. Waconia has a city hall attached to housing apartments. It's probably the closest example, but there's a unique project in Florida that's eerily similar to what we're contemplating here, which maybe leads us to believe that it's a strategy for other communities moving forward. And then finally, one of the bigger drawbacks, we have little to no room for expansion. So if we design this space, we have to live with it. Efficiency is the goal of everything we do anyhow, but we would really only be able to take over the cafe space if we absolutely had to at some point in the future. So pros and cons. Now budget, I guess. So it's probably really hard to see for most people, but this is just the primary components that make up the budget comparison. We have to add the obligatory disclaimer that these are preliminary, these are projections, but they're based on good numbers, working with our architects and engineers on recent projects that we could use for comparisons, and do believe that they're on the conservative or the high end of all spectrums. So we're comfortable with them right now, but there's going to be flux, you know, downward and upward. As much as there's changes in layouts and everything else with these sites, these things will change, but a good approximation. So I think some of the primary categories, just to give you a sense of what makes up the overall budget. Demo is a component that would impact the budget of this site more so than the other site, and I can explain why. So under both scenarios, we demo the existing city hall because we don't want to have anything to do with keeping that around for any sort of use. If we locate at Central Avenue, we demo the existing city hall, and it frees up that site for future development, and we can recapture our demolition costs through that redevelopment. If we demo it and locate here, it's just a sunk cost into this site. Construction, so in the case of Central Avenue, our construction budget is really for what's called TI, which stands for tenant improvements. Let me start by saying that our space at Central is a condo, so the city would own it. We would not lease, we would not be renters. It would be our own purchased space that we could sell or do whatever we want with at a future date. But that space is going to take a certain amount of money to finish it once the building is built around it. The developer has built a $2 million budget into his project because of the efficiencies that we can gain through the financing mechanisms and economies of scale as being part of this larger project. We get $2 million to start off with to build out our interior and put it towards everything we can. In staff's estimation, it's going to take more than that, and we don't want to skim on amenities and the quality of the build materials that go into the city hall space. We really want to make it something special. So we've increased or brought up the budget above that base $2 million, and we're accounting for $3.5 million that it would take. So we have to come up with essentially $1.5 million to finish it out in a way that we think would be appropriate. When it comes to the standalone site, the base construction estimate based on the square footage as it stands to just build the building is just under $6 million. The next biggest component for projects like this is furniture, fixture, equipment, technology, and security. So all the components that go into these new buildings are quite expensive. We've budgeted $500,000 per location. It's actually slightly above what we're seeing in the industry standard for recent buildings and the architect's estimates. Part of that is we really want to take the opportunity to bolster technology and also look at enhanced security measures. Soft costs include a number of things, but it's architectural and engineering services, legal services, all of the support mechanisms that go into the planning and design for these projects. We gain efficiencies at Central Avenue. It's estimated to be about half the cost because a lot of those components are built into the bigger project and being borne by the broader development and the developer of the other components of the site. So $500,000 at Central Avenue and just under $1 million estimated for the standalone facility. Site preparation is also elevated with the standalone building. The utility work and the groundwork to prepare this site to be development ready is borne by the city, and it's shared on the other site and predominantly borne by the broader development. We've included a placeholder for fiber optic cabling because we'll probably have a greater necessity than his facility would need for our needs, and that we would bear the burden of that cost more predominantly. When it's all said and done, Central Avenue budget stands at just under $2.7 million right now for cash from the city in comparison to $8.2 for the standalone site. The city has been saving as part of our capital improvement fund. For capital projects, we've been putting money aside. Right now, that fund has about $6 million in it. And that's the calculus. And one of the biggest decisions that we're ruminating on is if we're able to save a significant amount of money at one location, what can we do with those additional resources? But it's complicated. So that is the two sites, the budget, the physical stuff. But I did want to address some specific feedback that has been coming into the city related to the Central Avenue site over the last few weeks. We've kind of compiled some of the concerns and wanted to address some of them before we go to the Q&A. So parking's come up a lot. I think it stands out. We propose to remove a municipal ramp. And what do we do with that? And are we going to have enough parking at that location? The city will have dedicated parking on the first floor for City Hall use, city staff, and the daily activities of the City Hall. It will be different. So we will not have that municipal space. It's certainly underutilized as it stands. It's not open all the way and isn't being used to the extent where we don't think we can accommodate that need. We also are contemplating an expansion of the parking area behind the library. We've got some vacant land that we could build into this concept so that we can provide more parking in this vicinity to balance that. Loss of tax base and commercial space. So